There are lots of factors that influence your pricing. One major factor is your expenses. How much does it cost to run your daycare business? To answer this, you need to look at your 4 buckets of expenses: staffing, occupancy, program, and administration. Staffing expenses are related to employing teachers and other staff. For example, salaries and wages, contract labour, employee development and recruiting are all staffing expenses. Occupancy expenses are those that affect your occupancy rate. For example, cleaning supplies, rent, repair and maintenance, and utilities all go hand in hand with your occupancy rate. Administration expenses keep your daycare centre ticking over smoothly. Office supplies, advertising expenses, depreciation expenses, and even business travel are all examples of admin expenses. Program expenses are those associated with running your program. These are expenses like class materials, diapers, kitchen supplies, and field trips. Taking time to analyse your 4 buckets of expenses will help you figure out your total running costs and see where you are with your business. You can think about your 4 buckets of expenses in terms of how they affect your revenue. You need to calculate what percentage of your revenue is eaten up by each of these expense buckets. To make a profit, it's a good idea to keep each bucket within a certain range. Staffing should be less than 55 to 60% of your total revenue when you exclude the owner's wages. Occupancy should be less than 10 to 15% of your total revenue. Admin should be less than 5 to 10% of your total revenue. And program should be less than 10 to 15% of your total revenue. If you keep your expenses on the low side, these 4 buckets of expenses would use up to 80% of your revenue, but leave you with a profit of 20%. Not bad. On the other hand, if your expense buckets are on the high side, you could end up spending all your money paying your bills and make no money at all. As an owner, you need to decide what's important to you. If you want to pay higher wages to staff, then your other costs will need to be lower. If you need to pay high rent because you're in a big city, you'll need to keep payroll low or charge your clients more. Once you're familiar with your 4 buckets of expenses and understand what your costs are, you can work out your ideal profit margin. Then you can set this as your goal and work towards achieving it. Let's take a look at an income statement belonging to a childcare education provider. You can see the 4 buckets of expenses: staffing, occupancy, admin and program in the green column. Their staffing expenses include salaries and wages, severance payments and holiday pay. Their program expenses include things like field trips, class materials and diapers. Their administration expenses are things like disaster preparedness, advertising and bank and payroll fees. And their occupancy expenses include cleaning suppliers, rent and utilities. One thing I get asked a lot is how we know where things should be. It's really based on your school. For example, if you have an item called interest expense, you might be paying down a loan for your building. In that case, you would label that item as occupancy. But if it's a general line of credit or credit cards you're paying interest on, it may make more sense to put that item in admin or program. It really just depends on what's going on in your school specifically. Each expense category is also broken down by percent of total revenue. Notice how these percentages change from year to year. Check out the goal percentage ranges to see how each of the expense categories compares. They seem to be on target with most of the goals shown here, although their staffing expenses are quite high in year 3. This reduces again in year 4, getting back on track. Let's take a look at a couple of scenarios. In the first example, this daycare owner's 4 buckets of expenses are as follows. Staffing is 60%, occupancy is 20%, admin is 10% and program is 5%. When we add these up, we can see that their total expenses are 95% of revenue. This leaves the business owner with a small 5% profit each month. It's also clear that the occupancy expense bucket is too high. It should be in the 10 to 15% range or lower. Unfortunately, this is a fixed cost that can't easily be changed. Let's say the owner would like a 20% profit margin. To achieve this, they need to work out how much to raise tuition rates to increase their profit. We know that their current expense to revenue ratio is 95%. We also know that their desired profit margin is 20%, which means their desired expense to revenue ratio is 80%. To calculate their tuition rate increase, we need to divide their current profit margin of 95% by their desired profit margin of 80% and subtract 1. Then multiply the result by 100 to give a final result of 19%. This means the owner needs to increase their tuition fees by 19%. Now, let's look at what happens to the owner's 4 buckets of expenses when they apply this 19% increase. To calculate that, we need to divide the original percentage by 1.19 or 100% plus 19%. For example, if we divide the old staffing figure of 60% by 1.19, the new staffing figure is approximately 51%. So, with the 19% tuition increase applied, the owner's 4 buckets of expenses are as follows. Staffing is 51%, occupancy is 17%, admin is 8%, and program is 4%. This means that their total expenses are now 80% of revenue, giving them their desired 20% monthly profit. Here's another example. This time the owner's 4 buckets of expenses are staffing 50%, occupancy 15%, admin 10%, program 10%. The owner has a current profit margin of 15%, which she's happy with, but she wants to give her employees a 10% raise across the board. Also, her rent is going to increase by 5% this year. To maintain her current profit margin, she needs to work out how much to raise tuition rates to cover both of these outlays. First, she needs to work out how much to raise tuition to cover her employees' pay rise. We need to multiply both percentages together. So that's 50 divided by 100 multiplied by 10 divided by 100. Then multiply the result by 100 to convert back to a percentage. And the answer is 5%. To cover her employees' 10% pay rise, she needs to increase tuition by 5%. Then we need to apply the same calculation to her rent to work out how much to raise tuition to cover her rent increase. We know her current occupancy expense is 15% and her rent is going to increase by 5%. We need to multiply both percentages together. So that's 15 divided by 100 multiplied by 5 divided by 100. Then multiply the result by 100 to convert back to a percentage. And this gives us 1%. To cover her rent increase, she needs to raise tuition rates by 1%. To cover both the employee's pay rise and rent increase costs, the owner needs to increase tuition rates by a total of 6%. That's 5% for the pay rise plus 1% for the rent increase. The owner also needs to consider inflation, which is driving up the cost of other items like groceries and supplies. We encourage owners to evaluate their prices at least twice per year. Also, when increasing prices, owners should always factor in the current inflation rate, in addition to their own expense increases.